Thank you for joining me this week. I will be discussing the lost African kingdoms and civilizations. This week, I will be focusing on the Carthage Kingdom. Carthage originated as a city-state in what is now Tunisia around the 8th or 9th century BCE. It was established by Phoenician settlers who migrated to the area from ancient Lebanon. Over time, Carthage developed into a vast seafaring empire controlling large portions of coastal North Africa, the southern Iberian Peninsula, and numerous Mediterranean islands, including Corsica, Sardinia, and Sicily. At its peak, Carthage had a population of nearly 500,000 inhabitants. By the mid-3rd century BCE, the Carthaginian Emperor entered into conflict with another ancient great power, the Roman Empire, leading to the Punic Wars. These wars concluded in 146 BCE. Oral history of Carthage. Legend holds that Carthage was founded around 825 BC by Queen Dido, who had fled from the city of Tyre to escape her murderous brother Pygmalion. Archaeological evidence confirms that Phoenician traders from Tyre founded the city of Carthage, or New City, as Carthage was known in its native language in the second half of the 9th century BC. The settlement of Carthage was part of a centuries-long pattern of Phoenician colonization in the eastern Mediterranean aimed at controlling the lucrative trade in tin, gold, silver, and copper. Eventually, the Phoenicians established more than 300 coastal colonies across North Africa and the Iberian Peninsula. Hispania. By the 3rd century BC, an independent Carthage had grown into one of the more powerful states in the Mediterranean, controlling much of North Africa, Sardinia, and Corsica, along with sections of Sicily and the Iberian Peninsula. The city itself grew to be the second largest in the ancient Mediterranean, behind only Alexandria, the magnificent capital of Ptolemaic Egypt. With its powerful fleet, Carthage dominated trade throughout the western Mediterranean and even into the Atlantic. Carthage had slowly evolved from a colony to the capital of a new empire. As the city grew in size and power during the 7th century BC, it progressively asserted its independence from Tyre, founding colonies of its own and expanding its territory in Africa. Even so, Carthage continued to signal its allegiance to its mother city by dispatching an annual embassy to Tyre's temple of Melkart, the city's patron deity. After Tyre was conquered by the Babylonians in the early 6th century, the Phoenician colonies in the western Mediterranean turned to powerful Carthage for protection and support against their Greek rivals. Old Phoenician colonies such as Utica and Gades in Hispania became bound by treaty to Carthage. Carthage's approach to its allies differed from that developed by Rome. While Roman allies participated in a mutual defensive organization under the leadership of Rome, which gradually integrated its allies by granting their people rights and even citizenship, Carthage preferred to extract punitive taxes from its looser confederation of subjects and subject allies. These taxes were used in turn to finance Carthage's fleet and to pay mercenary soldiers. Despite their extensive contact with their Greek neighbors and Libyan subjects, the Carthaginians retained their Punic language, a dialect of Phoenician and a Semitic language related to Hebrew. Punic would long outlast Carthage's empire. It was still spoken in northern Africa as late as the 5th century AD, but died out soon thereafter, leaving only a few inscriptions and scattered quotations as witnesses. The Carthaginians also retained distinctive customs, including the sacrifice of infants to Baal Hammon and his consort Tanit, a practice that had long since been abandoned in Tyre and the other Semitic kingdoms of the Levant. Recently, scholars have questioned whether the Carthaginians engaged in widespread child sacrifice or if it was reserved for especially dire moments, or if the substantial archaeological evidence indicating such sacrifice has been misinterpreted, colored by the biased accounts of Carthage's enemies, from whom we derive most of our information about the city and its people. It remains a controversial question. As the head of a Punic coalition, Carthage forged anti-Greek alliances with the Etruscans, who controlled Rome until the late 6th century BC. They also courted the support of the far-off Persians, who were attempting to conquer the Greeks in the eastern Mediterranean. It was said in antiquity that on the same day when the united eastern Greeks destroyed the fleet of the Persian king Xerxes at Salamis in 480 BC, a coalition of western Greeks routed a Carthaginian force at Himera in Sicily. This coincidence is almost certainly a later fabrication, but it does signal how events throughout the eastern and western Mediterranean were understood to be part of one grand narrative in antiquity. After their defeat at Himera, the Carthaginians avoided open conflict with the Greeks in Sicily, turning their attention instead to expanding their territory in Africa, exploring and colonizing the Atlantic coast, perhaps as far south as modern Cameroon, and developing their inland trade routes to the south. As Carthage emerged as a major military power, its political system was evolving from a monarchy to a more inclusive republican form of government, a transformation experienced by many other city-states throughout the ancient Mediterranean at this time, including Rome. Eventually, Carthage's government came to be led by two annually elected magistrates, suffets or kings, a council of elders, the Adirim or mighty ones consisting of the leading men of the city, and an assembly of citizens who could arbitrate between the suffets and council when they were at odds. Unlike the Romans, whose annually elected magistrates managed both civilian and military affairs, the Carthaginians created a separate office of general who was appointed for a specific mission and who would continue in office until that mission was completed. As a result, these generals could accumulate considerable power. Their power was checked, however, by the Council of 104 judges who had the power to convict and crucify delinquent generals. Carthage's political system was often praised in antiquity. Aristotle thought Carthage possessed one of the best constitutions. In practice, however, a single preeminent family often acquired political supremacy for extended periods of time. Sometimes this family would rule collaboratively with other members of the aristocracy. At others, it would exercise near absolute authority in the city. To understand the savage tenacity displayed by the Carthaginians and Romans in the Second Punic War, it is necessary to understand the previous conflicts between the two powers. Early in their history, Rome and Carthage signed several treaties of friendship and even fought as somewhat unenthusiastic allies against adventuring Greek potentates. But Rome's growing involvement with Carthage's Greek adversaries in southern Italy and Sicily, combined with Rome's traditional fear of powerful neighbors, caused tensions between the two powers to increase. Beginning in 264 BC, Rome and Carthage would fight three brutal wars for control of the western Mediterranean. Collectively, these conflicts are known as the Punic Wars, after the Latin word for Phoenician. Punis culture Carthaginian religion was based on Phoenician religion, derived from the faiths of the Levant, a form of polytheism. Many of the gods the Carthaginians worshiped were localized and are now known only under their local names. Carthage produced finely embroidered silks, dyed textiles of cotton, linen, and wool, artistic and functional pottery, and perfumes. Its artisans worked expertly with ivory, glassware, and wood, as well as with metals and precious stones. It traded in salted Atlantic fish and fish sauce, garum, and brokered the products of almost every Mediterranean people. In addition to manufacturing, Carthage practiced highly advanced and productive agriculture using iron plows, irrigation, and crop rotation. Carthaginian commerce extended by sea throughout the Mediterranean and perhaps into the Atlantic as far as the Canary Islands, and by land across the Sahara Desert. According to Aristotle, the Carthaginians and others had treaties of commerce to regulate their exports and imports. The Empire of Carthage depended heavily on its trade with cities of the Iberian Peninsula, from which it obtained vast quantities of silver, lead, copper, and most importantly, tin ore, which was essential for the manufacture of bronze objects by the civilizations of antiquity. Carthaginian trade relations with the Iberians and the naval strength that enforced Carthage's monopoly on Iberian trade, and that with tin-rich Britain, made it the sole significant broker of tin and maker of bronze in its day. Maintaining this monopoly was one of the major sources of power and prosperity for Carthage. Carthaginian merchants strove to keep the location of the tin mines secret. In addition to its role as the sole significant distributor of tin, Carthage's central location in the Mediterranean and control of the waters between Sicily and Tunisia allowed it to control the eastern people's supply of tin. Carthage was also the Mediterranean's largest producer of silver mined in Iberia and on the North African coast. After the tin monopoly, silver was one of its most profitable trades. Carthage also sent caravans into the interior of Africa and Persia. It traded its manufactured and agricultural goods to the coastal and interior peoples of Africa for salt, gold, timber, ivory, ebony, apes, peacocks, skins, and hides. Its merchants invented the practice of sale by auction and used it to trade with the African tribes. In other ports, they tried to establish permanent warehouses or sell their goods in open-air markets. Carthage obtained amber from Scandinavia, and from the Celtiberians, Gauls, and Celts, they got amber, tin, silver, and furs. Sardinia and Corsica produced gold and silver for Carthage, and Phoenician settlements on islands such as Malta and the Balearic Islands produced commodities that would be sent back to Carthage for large-scale distribution. The city supplied poorer civilizations with simple products, such as pottery, metallic objects, and ornamentations, often displacing the local manufacturing, and meanwhile brought its best works to wealthier civilizations such as the Greeks and Etruscans. Carthage traded in almost every commodity wanted by the ancient world, including spices from Arabia, Africa, and India. It also participated in the slave trade. Military and warfare. The military of Carthage was one of the largest military forces in the ancient world. Although Carthage's navy was always its main military force, the army acquired a key role in the spread of Carthaginian power over the native peoples of northern Africa and the southern Iberian Peninsula from the 6th century BC to the 3rd century BC. Carthage's military also allowed it to expand into Sardinia and the Balearic Islands. This expansion transformed the military from a body of citizen soldiers into a multinational force composed primarily of foreign mercenary units. Ancient Carthage was almost constantly at war with the Greeks or the Romans. One set of wars was called the Punic Wars. They fought with Rome from 265 BCE to 146 BCE. The main cause of the Punic Wars was the conflict of interest between the existing Carthaginian Empire and the expanding Roman Republic. The Romans were initially interested in expansion via Sicily, at that time a cultural melting pot, part of which lay under Carthaginian control. At the start of the First Punic War, Carthage was the dominant power of the Western Mediterranean, with an extensive maritime empire. Rome, meanwhile, was the rapidly ascending power in Italy, which still lacked the naval power of Carthage. It was during the Second Punic War that the Carthaginian leader Hannibal launched his famous overland attack on Rome. By the end of the Third War, which began in 149 BCE, many hundreds of thousands of soldiers from both sides had been lost, and Rome succeeded in conquering Carthage's empire. The Romans completely destroyed Carthage and became the most powerful state in the Western Mediterranean. During this period, Rome emerged as the dominant Mediterranean power and one of the most powerful cities in classical antiquity. The Roman victories over Carthage in these wars gave Rome a preeminent status, a status it would retain until the 5th century CE. The Carthaginian Republic was one of the longest-lived and largest states in the ancient Mediterranean. Reports relay several wars with Syracuse and finally Rome, which eventually resulted in the defeat and destruction of Carthage in the Third Punic War. The Carthaginians were Phoenician settlers of primarily southern Mediterranean and southern European ancestry. The Phoenicians originated in the Mediterranean coast of the Levant. They spoke Canaanite, a Semitic language, and followed a local variety of the ancient Canaanite religion, the Punic religion. The Carthaginians traveled widely across the seas and set up numerous colonies. Unlike Greek, Phoenician, and Tyrian colonizers who only required colonies to pay due respect for their home cities, Carthage is said to have sent its own magistrates to govern overseas settlements. Ruins of Carthage. The fall of Carthage came at the end of the Third Punic War in 146 BC at the Battle of Carthage. 77. Despite initial devastating Roman naval losses and Hannibal's 15-year occupation of much of Roman Italy, which was on the brink of defeat but managed to recover, the end of the series of wars resulted in the end of Carthaginian power and the complete destruction of the city by Scipio Aemilianus. The Romans pulled the Phoenician warships out into the harbor and burned them before the city, and went from house to house capturing and enslaving the people. About 50,000 Carthaginians were sold into slavery. The city was set ablaze and razed to the ground, leaving only ruins and rubble. After the fall of Carthage, Rome annexed the majority of the Carthaginian colonies, including other North African locations such as Volubilis, Lixus, and Cella. Today, a Carthaginian peace can refer to any brutal peace treaty demanding total subjugation of the defeated side. Key events in the fall of Carthage: the Punic Wars, 264 to 146 BC, a series of 3 conflicts with Rome for Mediterranean dominance. Second Punic War, 218 to 201 BC. Despite Hannibal's successes, Carthage was defeated, lost its overseas territories, and was forced to pay massive reparations. Third Punic War, 149 to 146 BC. Rome, fearing a resurgence of Carthaginian power, attacked and destroyed the city. Destruction. The city was razed, and contrary to popular myth, it is disputed whether the land was actually sown with salt, as described on NASA's image site and in Reddit's. Aftermath. The area became a Roman province. A new city was built later by Julius Caesar, which became a key Roman economic center until 698 AD. Today, the site of the ancient city is a suburb of Tunis, Tunisia. Thank you for joining me this week as I discuss the aup3 Kingdom. Make sure to join me next week as I will be discussing the Carthage Kingdom. Join the conversation. Subscribe now and unlock the hidden history of Africa's lost civilizations. That's just the beginning. Stay curious.